for a repeat of not a repeat offender, repeat performer, Glenn Antizzo, Professor Antizzo, and I hope there's many more to come. Just want to first of all, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Great.
Let's talk about this thing because since the last time you were on, there were a lot of things that have happened. I don't know if you would agree, but I think when you look at the incremental things that are happening here that follow history, and I hate to say this, but I think we are closer to World War III. Nobody wants to think about this and sleep easy at nighttime, but your thoughts on this, Professor?
No, Paul, I think you're right. There really is no off-ramp right now. The Russians are frustrated that they are now over 2 weeks into the invasion and still have not accomplished their objectives. Only one city of any significance has fallen to Russian forces so far. They are now getting into the realm of using, terrorist tactics, dropping bombs on maternity wards, using thermobaric weapons, the so-called vacuum bombs. Yeah. Saying that they would provide safe havens and routes of escape for refugees and then going back on their word. I mean, clearly, Putin is sliding further and further down the road to basically setting up a scenario that looks like a combination of the, lead up to World War I and some, early episodes of World War II.
Bother you that we've blurred the line so much of what you can do and cannot do under the guidelines of NATO? This thing about shipping. Somebody mentioned it as almost like a hot potato. Who's got the hot potato last?
Yeah.
Shipping planes, and we don't want to be the last to touch them, so they can't blame us.
There was a report in the New York Times on Sunday that we've already shipped 17,000 anti-tank missiles to Ukraine. And I do not see the qualitative difference between sending highly effective, ultra-modern anti-tank weapons and 40-year-old Soviet-era technology. And basically the United States, look, Anthony Blinken was on TV, on CNN on Sunday, and said that, if the Poles gave the weapons, that we would backfill. The Poles just want to know that the rest of NATO's got their back, so they sort of threw it back to the United States and said, great, we'll give the planes, but we're going to send them to Germany, and the Ukrainians can pick them up there. And all of a sudden, now it's not a great idea anymore.
Well, wait a minute. That was the American Air Base in Germany, too.
Right.
Right. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
So how do you... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the Biden administration seems to have gotten cold feet on this, and they're worried that, they're going to somehow offend Vladimir Putin if the Poles get the planes that the Americans sort of promised in Germany on an American base rather than on a Polish base. At the end of the day, they're both NATO bases. And since we're supplying all these other weapons, we're supplying Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, we're supplying the Javelin anti-tank missiles, they already know that we are pretty much just up to the point before you start sending in troops and staging combat missions in terms of our activity. So I don't see what the qualitative difference is.
But one of the things you do not want in this scenario, it's much like having two surgeons who are operating on your child's heart disagreeing. It's a hell of a time to disagree.
Yes.
And then let me play for you cut here.
So the logistical questions here, just to put a little fine point on it, are things like how do you get planes into Ukraine in a way that is not escalatory? And what are the logistics and operational details of that? As of now, the Secretary Austin, Chairman Milley, and members of our Defense Department are in touch with Ukrainian counterparts, NATO counterparts, discussing what are clearly logistical challenges here.
The Russian accusations are absurd. They're laughable. And, in the words of my Irish Catholic grandfather, a bunch of malarkey. There's nothing to it. It's classic Russian propaganda.
Man, how old is Joe Biden that he's his grandfather? That's one of the things. But one other one here that is Gee, I had another cut where they were contradicting each other. Let me see if this is
At least in my experience of doing this for nearly 30 years, I cannot remember a time where we've seen such unity in the transatlantic relationship, both in policy and in principle. If his goal is to impose some kind of puppet regime by displacing the existing government and putting in place one to his liking, I think it's pretty evident by the response of the Ukrainian people that they will never accept that.
I want you to comment on that one. But what I was talking about, trying to find that cut, was where Blinken did say that we give you the green light to go on and do that. And then a little bit later on in the day, you apparently had John Kirby saying, wait a minute, this is contradicting that statement. You can't have this right on the precipice of possibly another world war.
Yeah. No, also on top of that, Paul, the problem is that you made this promise publicly to the Ukrainians. I mean, who speaks for this administration? Is it Blinken or is it General Austin over at the Defense Department speaking through Kirby? They have to get their message straight. And what's damaging about this is that it's actually done two things. First of all, you've basically are denying the Ukrainians material support that could help them in their war effort and make this more costly for the Russians, and to an extent sort of broken their I wouldn't say broken their spirit, maybe that's a little too much, but you're hurting their morale in this fight, which, in a sense, they're a surrogate for the rest of us in the free world. On the other hand, it is now sowing dissension within the alliance, which, the Biden administration was just crowing 2 weeks ago about how, unlike the Trump administration, which had divided NATO, now that they were bringing it all together, and they've never seen such unity since the Cold War. And now you have a fight that's developing between, as Donald Rumsfeld put it, old Europe and new Europe. And I put the United States possibly, somewhere in between the two. Old Europe is, Germany, France, others that are, worried about the outbreak of World War III. Yeah. And, remember the destruction, and that's why they don't want to go down that road or anything that even remotely approaches that road. So they're sort of on a road of, I wouldn't say appeasement, but certainly they're less enthusiastic for getting involved. Then, as Rumsfeld called the newer members of NATO, New Europe, Poland, Hungary, Romania, the Baltic states, who remember what it was like to be under the heel of the Soviet Union and don't want to go back. And they have this feeling in their gut that if Putin is not stopped and is able to gobble up Ukraine, that they're next on the hit parade. And they're worried. And they have a right to be.
Yeah, I think NATO, when you get back to this, too, and a lot of that was the news media. We didn't know what was true or not as far as people across NATO hating. I think it's composed of, what, 30 or 31 countries?
30
countries.
Right.
And then you start looking at this. What they didn't like was most of them being pushed by Donald Trump, saying, we're going to be there, but, hell, you people got to help start paying a bigger share of this.
Yeah.
You're not paying anything. And I think at one point they hated him for that, but they loved the idea that he was so unpredictable in some ways that nobody like Russia or China or anybody else that threatened any of those countries was going to even make a move, which turned out to be true.
Paul, you go back to the Kosovo War in 1999. Mm-hmm. I was among the people who said maybe we shouldn't get involved in this. It's Europe's affair. Europe has grown up, and Europe can take care of its own affairs. But NATO would not move without American leadership.
And look at the people who fled out of that country. We're getting a story this morning that 2 million Ukrainians have fled out of the country.
Yeah.
2 million. And here's what this idiot said.
We're already seeing climate refugees around the world. If you think migration has been a problem in Europe from the Syrian war, or even from what we see now, wait till you see 100 million people for whom the entire food production capacity has collapsed.
I know. Here's the same guy who, when he was asked his initial response about the invasion, he said, well, I hope this doesn't detract Putin from the ultimate goal of climate change and being involved. So what an idiot. More with the good professor coming up next. By the way, that idiot who was saying, I don't mind paying $15 a gallon, for Mother Earth, and he drives a Tesla, was Stephen Colbert, who, by the way, is a net worth of about $75 million and gets an annual salary of $15 million plus. So he's not really worried about the gas prices for the American people. Amazing. When we were talking about a couple of different things here, but when you're trying to deal with a madman and trying to have him reason, which it seems more and more applicable to Putin of Vladimir now, but when you finally get him into a corner, when you've cornered him, he's not going to become any more sane.
Yeah,
and that's where it gets scary.
Yeah, and you see people around him starting to back off from him. There was a story yesterday about some oligarch who was close to Putin, who has just renounced his citizenship, saying that he can't go along with this. And a lot of the people that are worried about him using perhaps a nuclear weapon, you got to ask yourself, if you were a Russian commander and you got that order from Putin, knowing the situation better than most people in Russia know it, would you do it? Would you follow that order? I'm not so sure they would.
Yeah. What scares me is his closest confidants have been brainwashed for so many years here. They may not look at the consequence.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. What do you think the relationship is? Because I've seen several stories that China would love to have this continue as it is, because a country that's been completely ostracized from the entire world is losing things daily. I mean, they can't even get Netflix anymore. Think over there. Everything is being pulled out.
Right.
Some of the franchises are slowing down or shutting down. Some of the gas stations like Shell are shut down. So it's going to take a long time to rebuild this. And the story said that China was loving this because Russia basically is going to become a child under a dependent of China. Everything they need is going to have to go to China. Everything they sell is going to have to go to China. And China's going to say, well, okay, we'll do this, but we want your military technology that you have to even upgrade ours, is one of the stories out there. But what do you think? And I'm talking with Glenn Antizzo, and Glenn is the Associate Professor of Political Science at Mississippi College. What do you think this relationship is now?
Well, I think the Chinese are, first of all, looking at the world reaction to this. They're gauging what's happening with Russia, and they're looking to see what the West is going to do about this. Because if the West will not make a stand here, then they clearly will not make a stand in Taiwan. And I think that they are very well positioned to be able to, at some point in the future, invade the island and try to forcefully drag it back into China. Obviously, you've seen an axis, if you will, if I can use World War II nomenclature, between Moscow and Beijing. And it would seem to me that China is sort of now becoming the senior partner here, that Russia is going to be weakened by this in the long run. And you're right. I think that the Russians are being isolated. I don't know if you heard about this last week, but MasterCard and Visa have ceased operations in Russia. Yes, I mean, the Russians do have something called the Power of Siberia pipeline that they could ship some gas to China in, but I don't think that they're going to be able to export as much as they were, when the access to Europe was there. Yeah. So I think that their economy may have to fall back on reliance on China.
I was just thinking about this, but if that scenario played out similarly in China, economically, would China be as devastating on the West than the oil factor? That's about all they have in Russia, economically.
I'm sorry, Paul. Can you clarify? Are you asking if?
Yeah, if this played out in China, and again, China said they're going to invade Taiwan, right, and everything happened similarly to Russia invading Ukraine, economically, would that be as devastating to Europe, to the West? And to the West?
Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we use here, we get from China. I mean, we just don't make a whole lot here in the United States anymore. I remember, when I was in graduate school back in the 90s, Walmart billed themselves as the place that you go to buy American stuff. And, today, trying to find something American outside of the food section of Walmart is impossible.
Let me say this. If you want to bring that to fruition, what Professor Glenn Antizzo is talking about, and your wife drags you to, what is it? Home store, whatever it is, one of those big box stores. You try to find something that's built in America.
Yeah.
And you cannot do it. You can walk down aisles in a store that's the size of a football field, and they've got 5 gazillion things in there. Turn them over and look.
Yeah. No, I don't.
You won't find anything.
I don't. And it's not just there. I mean, it's elsewhere as well. I'm not sure that a stitch of clothing I'm wearing now was manufactured in the United States.
Well, and that was one of the reasons, too, I think they had to get Donald Trump out of there, because he had brought that in reality to the American people, and some things were changing. So what's next? What do you think? How long do we have before this does it either go on for months and months, or is at some point that he's going to ask for some type of a ceasefire, which he's done sporadically, and some bargaining chips?
Yeah, my understanding is that he's already put a sort of a ceasefire on the table, but the terms are completely unacceptable. My understanding are the terms are that they get a pledge from Ukraine that they will never join NATO, that they recognize the Russian annexation of Crimea officially, legally, that they recognize the independence of the breakaway republics, the two that the Russians recognized a couple of weeks ago in eastern Ukraine, and that they halt combat operations. And basically, these terms, if this is what Russia in fact is offering, is a de facto surrender to the Russians. And I just think after the amount of blood that has been spilled, after the atrocities that have taken place, I do not see the Ukrainians doing this. I think the Ukrainians would rather go down fighting than to give in to these demands. And remember, everybody's making World War II analogies, but let me sort of go back to World War I. You had Serbian nationalists who assassinated the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne in Sarajevo, and Austria, understandably, was upset. So they made they gave an ultimatum to Serbia, and basically the ultimatum would have compromised Serbian sovereignty to the point that Serbia would become a new vassal state, and the Serbians said no. Yeah. And that's how World War I starts.
I think if you know your history, and if you go back and read history, the words that you mentioned a little earlier is probably on the front of most of the chapters there, the axis of evil, through everything from Bush to earlier. But it's a scary phrase because we know exactly what that leads to. The ceasefire in Russia was, what was the name of the city? Mariupol, I think it was.
Yeah, it's a port in the southeastern part of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. They had 17 people were injured in that hospital. And I don't know if it's official designation or what yet, but I do believe the tag of war criminal is justified on this guy. Your final thoughts, sir?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that the sooner that the West gets an indictment to drag him back to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, the better.
Hey, he's got enough money for a good lawyer, doesn't he? Always good seeing you. Don't be a stranger. We'll get you back on to give us an update. It's Associate Professor Glenn Antizzo.
Thank you.
Of Political Science, Mississippi College, our favorite paisan as consultant on the war.